I'm speaking today with Mikael Hagstrom, the EVP for EMEA and Asia Pacific for SaaS. We're going to speak to him today about business analytics, what he sees happening with banks in analytics around the region, and what some of the trends really are. Hi Michael, thanks for speaking to us.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You cover such a huge region. You've got all of EMEA, you've got Asia Pacific, you've got Australia, you've got Japan. This is about 60% of SaaS's revenues right here. What do you see really happening in analytics in financial services? Maybe you can tell me some of the best practices, things that are happening for banks around the world that you see, but also maybe talk a little bit about specific banks in Asia and what they're doing.
Right. Yeah, okay. So I see three major trends in financial markets, and that is the regained focus on risk, and also a increased focus on what's going to happen with new regulations coming on board. The second area is a strong refocus on the customer. And the third area is really more related to going back to the basics of optimization, perhaps, of the core business areas. And analytics plays a strong role in all three of those. On risk, we have seen a growing trend towards new types of risk. So not just perhaps, as you've seen in the past, strong specialization of credit risk, say for instance in the Chinese market. It's now a growing focus on everything from liquidity risk to the more operational risks involved, and to combine those. And to bring that together with your financial data and your customer data, which usually were kind of departmentalized in different environments, enables banks to do the likes of risk-weighted performance on the customer level real time. So you're going to also see this hybrid between the different areas, customer management, risk management, financial management, coming together, and that's a rapidly growing trend at the moment.
Are there any sort of case studies that you've got, specific banks that are doing something especially interesting in analytics?
Well, I think the example of bringing the three areas together comes directly from Lloyds Bank, and they just redeployed after having done one of the largest mergers in the UK and moved some of their HQ right here into Hong Kong. I think in terms of being able to modernize the existing business processes, get much more value out of the use of analytics. That's a good example. But we also have Citi with their analytical headquarters in Singapore that almost elevated to one of the best in class globally within the Citi world, based right here. So I think you don't need to go very far to see some of the best global practices emerging right here from there.
What are some of the challenges of banks that would want to set up those kinds of structures? Obviously, the long-term benefits can materialize into real ROI, but initially there will be plenty of challenges, sort of hurdles to overcome just to get there in the first place.
But I think the first one, which is the pure practical one, is the siloed thinking around data. Everyone wants to own their data, and each department has theirs. So it almost has to come as a customer pressure that I want to be treated as one customer across the different departments of the bank, or from the top of the bank. The next one is to see, when you have those capabilities, what new business benefits you can get out of it. I'll give you an example. Risk calculations for value at risk. Usually in a compliance environment is done over a 2-3 week period. Now we can bring it down to close to real time. Now what would the advantage be of doing it in 15 minutes? Well, it allows you to actually do the risk assessments before you actually take a position. So the person on the trading floor can actually get the simulations before the trade is closed. And then you can influence your value at risk before the decision point rather than after. But that would change the business process somewhat, because now it's the trader on the trading floor that does the risk analytics and the risk department enabling, rather than the risk department doing the analytics. So that's a slight change, but you can see extraordinary benefit when this is put into play.
Where does the regulator sort of fall into this? Because obviously they would have their view on data storage issues and other sorts of things. How much of an impediment is that, and how much do regulators really have a say in the type of work that you want proposing?
Well, I think the regulators are merely stimulating the need for having the value at risk, the economic risk calculation, sort of parallel or separate from the risk calculations that the regulator want. So the ones you need to run the bank are increasingly different from the ones that the regulator want. What's important then is that this is coherent. You can trace back your reports to the regulator. What we see increasingly is that the regulator wants more dynamic in the dialogue. They want to be able to ask a question, get an answer without waiting 3 weeks. So I think they are putting pressure on modernizing the environment, and at the same time there's an increased need for the bank to modernize the environment. So far it's rather pointing in the same direction. But we'll see, maybe that will change depending on what comes up next.
What about the challenges in terms of where data is stored? The regulator would have a point of view on that. I believe Korean regulators have regulations about the data being stored in Korea. How does this impact the capability of a bank to do the type of broad analytics work that you're talking about?
I think when it comes to applying traditional technology, like for instance data warehousing, when you physically move the data, it does present a challenge. So does, for instance, the data privacy laws that are into play. And if Europe now make their upcoming decisions and countries start to follow, that will be an issue. But that said, with the exponentially growing data volumes, we're going to have to leave those traditional methods like enterprise warehousing behind anyways and go to the likes of state vectors. So you have an overarching state vector that describes the state of a customer or a specific portfolio, and that all the intelligence about that is referenced from the state vector, so you know where the data is. By doing that, you don't really need to move the data, you don't really need to copy the data. There's sort of the next wave of technology that's coming through from that.
So the physical location of the data becomes less important?
If you deploy the next generation of solutions, it will be. For the classical data warehousing, it is and remains an issue, which we can find a lot of workarounds to deal with, but it still takes a lot of approvals and a fair bit of red tape to get through.
Okay. I guess, but the bottom line, of course, is that none of this is really possible if the information stays in silos. What are some of the things that you've seen that banks have successfully done in terms of breaking down, or maybe other non-banks as well, other institutions? What are some best practices in terms of breaking down a silo and consolidating information so that it can be, really work with?
Well, I think the Lloyd's example was really good in that sense, because not only did they consolidate data across departments based on the initiative from the board, but they also were able to merge the financial data, which usually is dealt with differently from the customer data and the risk data, and to be able to bring that together into one asset significantly increased the value of that data asset. But I think that comes from a strategic decision, and their decision was to view the data asset as one of the core assets. And if you don't have that mandate, either driven by the customer from the top, I suppose it's not going to be easy to cut through some of those internal resistance that you can face.
And in the cases that you've seen, have they typically sort of come from the top or from the customer?
Yes, I would say so. They're usually driven from the top when it comes to be able to create one enterprise view of data. It can be driven from IT, but then usually it ends up in an enterprise warehouse, which traditionally has included more, for instance, financial data than perhaps customer data or risk data.
Maybe moving on to a different topic, financial services are your biggest client group. Second biggest is government. Maybe in terms of some of the stuff that we've been already talking about, what are some of the trends that you see happening there, and what are some key issues for government?
Well, one of the largest ones now is around transparency and the service level to the citizen. In terms of investment, though, it's actually in terms of citizen safety, homeland security. Those areas, those are the areas we see growing the fastest. There are large trends around health, pension. I think aging and health are two very global issues. Analytics, for instance, to avoid epidemics early by forecasting and by identifying early outbreaks and being able to deal with that is also growing. So it's a few different areas perhaps, but overall when it comes to the areas of public safety and security is probably the largest one.
Okay, great. All right, thank you very much, Michael, for speaking to us today.
Well, thank you. It was a
Okay.
pleasure.
Excellent. Yeah.